August 29, 1895. Meriden Daily Republican, Meriden, Connecticut. Miss Clarke's case. Two remarkable theories offered in explanation. Auto-hypnosis suggested. A Boston spiritualist's theory of the case. When the American Society of Psychical Research meets in September, its attention will be engrossed by a rather remarkable communication concerning the strange disappearance and equally strange reappearance of Miss Lucretia Clarke, the Plainfield, New Jersey schoolteacher. This letter is now being prepared by a prominent Boston spiritualist who has engaged in collating instances of mysterious disappearances for the last 20 years to sustain a theory of what he calls obsession. No matter whether the Society consents to discuss the paper or not, it is probable that the case of Miss Clarke will be taken up and inquired into in its psychical aspect, which presents peculiarities that are without precedent, and the Society may request the attendance of Detective Louis J. Beck, who traced Miss Clarke from Plainfield to Fitchburg, Mass., where she had hired herself out as a domestic servant. Mr. Beck related the psychical side of the story to a New York Mall and Express reporter. Lucretia Clarke is, or was, a woman of more than ordinary ability. Her perceptive faculties were well developed, and she possessed a mathematical sense not often found in women. She was a student in languages and made a specialty of German, which she spoke fluently. Miss Clarke had been a teacher all her life. She was unfitted for any other occupation and knew no other. Her tastes were not domestic. She knew nothing of the duties of a household and was absolutely helpless when she ventured outside of the realm of her books. On the morning of May 9, she left Plainfield and came to New York for the purpose of buying furniture for a school which she proposed to open. She was perfectly sane when she boarded the train and perfectly sane when she got off. Instead of going to a furniture dealer, she went to Macy's, and there a change came over her mentality with the suddenness of a flash of lightning. It is at this point that the Boston spiritualist begins with his theory of obsession and follows it with subsequent events as corroborations. He says that Miss Clarke was obsessed by the spirit of Mary Burke, an Irish girl, and that Lucretia Clarke ceased to exist for the time being. The facts, as now known, are that Lucretia Clarke did give her name as Mary Burke to the saleswoman who waited upon her and did use language and phrases altogether unlike her usual habit of speaking. She bought a black silk waist, a black skirt, a black hat, and a black veil. After leaving Macy's, she probably wandered about the city until the afternoon, for it was not much after 9 in the morning when she made the purchases. Somewhere in the city, she bought a bottle of hair dye. She went on board the boat for Providence, paid for a stateroom, and locked herself in. Then, she uncoiled her thick, luxuriant hair and snipped it off close to her head, after which she applied the stain. Next, she changed her clothing, and when she walked off the boat in the morning, she was as completely changed in her appearance as in her mentality. She followed the crowd to the train and rode to Boston and sought an employment agency. The proprietress remembers her distinctly as a decent-appearing Irishwoman who wanted a place as a house servant. Lucretia Clarke's identity had been sunk and lost then, and in all intents and purposes, she was Mary Burke, with all of Mary Burke's characteristics. The confident, unconscious air of superiority had disappeared. In its place was the respectful demeanor of the menial. Lucretia Clarke had been a proud woman all her life. She never asked favors. She was a natural mistress of others. As Mary Burke, she sat timidly with a group of women seeking situations similar to the place she was seeking herself. When she was engaged by a friend of ex-Mayor Hayden of Fitchburg, she expressed her thanks humbly and respectfully. The strangest part of the story, and which the Boston spiritualist offers as the clincher of his contention, is that when Lucretia Clarke entered the Hayden household, she went about her duties as though she had long experience as a servant. As Lucretia Clarke, she had never as much as pared a potato. As Mary Burke, she peeled potatoes, baked bread, roasted meats, and boiled vegetables. She knew nothing about any of these things before, and possessed a marked dislike for any sort of work outside of study. As the Hayden's servant, she was energetic and industrious, and gave no evidence that she had ever occupied any other station in life. In Plainfield, not a day had passed that she did not read a German book. In Fitchburg, she had forgotten all about German, and read English slowly, and often with an apparent lack of understanding. For 5 days this continued, and then the ego of Lucretia Clarke asserted itself, and the ego of Mary Burke disappeared. Miss Clarke remembers this distinctly now, and how she suddenly came to herself in the Hayden's kitchen. She found a mop in her hand and an apron over her skirt. For a moment, she was tempted to scream out, so startled was she at her surroundings. She repressed this feeling and began trying to find out where she was. Suddenly, she caught a glimpse of her reflection in the kitchen mirror and was almost frightened out of her wits when she saw her cropped hair and its inky color. Dazed and frightened, she sat down to think. She remembers gazing fixedly at the polished knob on the oven door for 5 minutes. It seemed to grow brighter and larger until it looked like a ball of fire. Then it slowly faded away and her mind became a blank again. Mrs. Hayden found her that morning scrubbing the kitchen floor. Mary Burke continued to exist until Detective Beck, with Mrs. Yan, Lucretia Clarke's sister, visited the house. That seemed to break the spell, and Lucretia Clarke was herself again. These are the facts which will be related with minute particularity at the meeting of the Psychical Society to support the Boston man's singular theory. Where it is apt to fail is in his failure to begin at the very beginning of the change in Miss Clarke's mental condition. Mr. Beck visited Plainfield to get a starting point for his inquiry. He found that besides her studies in languages and mathematics, Miss Clarke was greatly interested in hypnotism, and especially that branch known as auto-hypnosis or self-hypnotization. On the day before she left Plainfield, she remained locked in her room, and from the discoveries made by the detective, she devoted her time to destroying all her letters and memorandum books in which she kept a record of her experiments in auto-hypnosis. These papers were burned, but Miss Clarke overlooked one small diary. There were 20 closely written pages in the book, and the address of a Miss Herring, Johnstown, New York, the address of a New York furniture dealer, and an employment agency in New York and another one in Boston. This proved that Miss Clarke had then determined upon her trip and had even laid it out. Beck thinks that her personality had changed then, and the memoranda supported the theory that she had caused the change herself. Clues were followed up, and the one that led to Johnstown resulted in a rather peculiar discovery. Miss Herring had received an anonymous communication in a handwriting unknown to her. It was of a threatening character. The writer requested that an answer be sent to 28 Holt Street, Fitchburg, Mass. Something in the formation of the letter M suggested Miss Clarke's chirography, and, as one chance in 100, the detective asked Miss Herring to accompany him immediately. It was a long journey, but Miss Clarke's friend was willing to go. The conclusion proved to be correct, and the missing woman was restored to her friends. She is now resting quietly and is the same Lucretia Clarke that she was when she lived in Plainfield. The only one thing she can remember plainly is the brightly polished knob on the oven door in Hayden's kitchen, and how frightened she was for a few moments when she found herself in a strange place. When her normal condition is entirely restored, Miss Clarke can, if she will, explain what is now a rather peculiar mystery.